I'm here with Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran. Alexander, let's talk about the New York Times and a meeting that they had, I guess an all-hands-on-deck meeting, a company meeting, where you had the executive editor of the New York Times, Dean Baquet, if that's how you pronounce his name. Anyway, the executive editor decided to let everybody know during this meeting, and there's an audio recording of this. This is 100% confirmed. And I'll read you the quote soon. He decided to tell everybody at the New York Times that they're going to be shifting the narrative from Russia to racism. So they're changing the R's around. And this is not so much about the New York Times reporting the news and reporting factual news. To me, this looks like the New York Times is shaping news, is creating propaganda, and they're just making fake stuff up. And, you have the executive editor pretty much telling everybody, we're done with this Russia hoax and making up stuff about Russia. Now let's move on to make up stuff about racism. So that is how they're going to go after Trump now. What do you make of this story, Alexander?
Well, I have to say, I was actually flabbergasted. I have been very, very, very disillusioned by the New York Times and its coverage of Russiagate, and indeed of many other stories for a very, very long time. But having said that, I still remember the New York Times as the newspaper that once upon a time claimed to be and was largely accepted to be the paper of record, the paper where you went to look at the facts and to get the facts and which reported the facts. And it was always clear, it always made a clear distinction between reporting the facts and publishing opinions. And you used to get the editorial on the one side, which used to give you the New York Times' own opinion, and the op-ed, which often used to give the contrary opinion. But those are opinion pieces, and they were always distinct from the reportage of the facts. Now, what Mr. Baquet is basically saying is that all of that has gone out of the window. We tried to destroy Trump for 3 years by plugging Russiagate relentlessly. That's turned out to be completely wrong. Bob Mueller comes along, he gives evidence, he provides a report. It's quite clear that there was no collusion, despite the fact that the New York Times played perhaps the biggest role in printed media alongside the Washington Post in propagating this hoax, this completely false story. And now he says, well, I'm not sorry that we made a total false narrative for 3 years. I'm only sorry in a sense that it didn't work. So therefore, we're going to go now for plan B, which is to go after Donald Trump as a racist. Now, the cynicism of that just takes my breath away. It shows that the New York Times has only one agenda, really, which is to destroy Donald Trump. It's utterly cynical about Russiagate. It's utterly cynical about racism with respect to Donald Trump. So why should you believe what it says about Donald Trump and racism when it clearly didn't really believe what it said about Donald Trump and Russiagate? I mean, propaganda was what you called it. Propaganda is what it is.
All right, Alexander, let me read you an excerpt from the Washington Examiner from an opinion piece authored by Byron York. And here it is. It says, Dean Baquet, the executive editor of the New York Times, said recently that after the Mueller report, the paper has to shift the focus of its coverage from the Trump-Russia affair to the president's alleged racism. Quote, we built our newsroom to cover one story, and we did it truly well, Baquet said. Now we have to regroup and shift resources and emphasis to take on a different story, end quote. Baquet made the remarks at an employee town hall Monday. A recording was leaked to Slate, which published a transcript Thursday. What do you make of that, Alexander?
I mean, the cynicism simply takes one's breath away. I mean, given how much the New York Times investing in propagating this false Russiagate hoax story, given the enormous damage that hoax story has done to the United States, how we've had, tens of millions of dollars spent investigating that story, how people's lives have been turned upside down and destroyed because of it, how people have been sent to prison. I mean, Papadopoulos, one of the Trump aides, went to prison. And what does Baquet say? He doesn't say, I'm sorry, we did wrong, we made a total mess, Russiagate was a disastrous error, we apologize to our readers. What he says is, well, we built our newsroom to cover one story. That didn't turn out, so we're going to regroup and shift our resources, and we're going to emphasize something else. But the objective remains the same: destroy Donald Trump. So it's no longer about reporting news. It's no longer about analyzing news. It's no longer about giving the public informed opinions. It's about peddling propaganda about Donald Trump. And I repeat, if the New York Times has such a cynical opinion of its own coverage of Russiagate, why should we think that its opinions, its coverage of anything it says about race now is any less cynical? On the contrary, these comments by Dean Baquet suggest that its coverage of racism, particularly as it tries to link it with Donald Trump, is going to be every bit as cynical. I mean, a more destructive and more appalling approach to news and a more manipulative approach to news I can barely think of. And I repeat again, this is the newspaper that still calls itself the paper of record and which is still propagating the story of fake news and which is still accusing all kinds of sites like our site of spreading disinformation and of being in league with Russia and with all that sort of thing. Well, here's the truth. We don't peddle disinformation. The New York Times does. You have it from its own executive editor in his own words. We cover one story. We did it truly well, even though it was all false. It all turned out to be wrong. Now, all we're going to do is regroup and shift our resources to a different story with the same objective, however, which is to destroy Donald Trump.
Alexandra, this is not the first time that the New York Times has peddled in propaganda that has destroyed lives. Okay, this time you could say that they were accomplices in a deep state coup against Trump, which I think it's safe to say that they were accomplices to the deep state, to the Obama administration, to the DNC, to the Clinton campaign. But, they were the number one newspaper that propagated Iraq WMDs, in which, you could say that they were indirectly responsible for a war, an illegal war against Iraq, and the death of hundreds, if not millions, of lives. And I believe the journalist, one of the journalists that was mainly involved in propagating the WMD myth, I think was Judith Miller, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is nothing new for the New York Times, is it?
No, it's nothing new, but as I said, it's become absolutely transparent. And I'm glad you brought up WMD because, of course, that was an alliance, if you like, between the media, the New York Times especially, and the deep state of the United States to propagandize for a war. And Judith Miller was the only journalist who paid a price for being involved in that story, which turned out to be completely untrue. Now we have the New York Times propagandizing for the deep state in a plot against the President of the United States, which is intended to delegitimize his election. How far has the Grey Lady fallen? Absolutely. They're going from bad to worse.
Do you think the New York Times, anyone at the New York Times, feels any kind of guilt or remorse for the lies and propaganda that they spread? Or is this just part of the job? I mean, they believe in the ideology maybe that they're spreading right now, this, postmodernist, neoliberal ideology so much that they're willing to just blatantly lie and mislead people. They were responsible for a war in Iraq. They were one of the parties responsible for a war in Iraq. I'm not going to put all the blame on them, but they helped. I mean, do these people, it just amazes me that they do such things. Do they feel any guilt whatsoever?
No, it's quite clear that they don't feel any guilt at all. I mean, as I understand it, at least what the Washington Examiner says, we only know about these comments of Dean Baquet because they were leaked by someone who, according to the Washington Examiner, doesn't think that the New York Times, in its anti-Trump campaign, is going far enough. And so far from being embarrassed about getting the Russiagate story wrong, Dean Baquet brags about how well they covered it and about the fact that they were awarded 2 Pulitzer Prizes because of it. So, no, they don't feel any shame. They don't feel any embarrassment. They are obviously ideologically driven now. And you can no longer call them, it seems to me, a newspaper in any proper sense of the word, because they're not reporting news. They are reporting propaganda originating from within the deep state, which aims either for war in places like Iraq or Syria or wherever, or seeks, in the case of Donald Trump, to destroy him.
Would you say the New York Times, finally, Alexander, is the New York Times a propaganda arm of the deep state, of the globalists, of the Democrat Party, of all three? How would you describe them? I mean, they're not a propaganda arm of, say, like Pravda or something like that, of the government, like the communist government in the Soviet Union's time. But they're a propaganda arm of who would you categorize them as?
Well, I'm glad you brought up Pravda, because, of course, Pravda is always brought up in these situations. But, of course, Pravda, as you correctly say, was the official organ of the Soviet Communist Party. So, I mean, it set out quite openly the opinions of the Soviet Communist Party. The New York Times, I reiterate again, claims to be the newspaper of record. It claims to be independent. It claims to be objective in its reporting of the news. A couple of years ago, I remember it publishing all kinds of, pompous advertisements about how objective it is in its reporting of the news. And what we see from here is that it's none of these things. And who is it working for? Yes, it is working for the deep state, if we mean by that elements within the intelligence agencies and the US government bureaucracy that are continuously pursuing this agenda of regime change wars and destabilization, including, it seems, destabilization of a US president who gets in their way. And yes, they are in league with the neo-globalist, neoliberal elite, which is allied to that deep state and shares that objectives. And yes, they are allied with the Democratic Party, or at least with that wing of the Democratic Party, which now dominates the Democratic Party, and which is in alliance with those other two elements. I mean, it didn't support, as I remember, Bernie Sanders. It supported Hillary Clinton during the 2016 election. And perhaps we should bear that in mind, that Bernie Sanders, through most of his political career, has been an independent, not a Democrat. And what we see is this alliance of the Democratic Party, the neoliberal, neo-globalists, and the deep state, and the way in which they're prepared to subvert the Constitution of the United States, to remove an elected president and to delegitimize him, and the way in which what the former newspaper of record is now essentially the propaganda arm of this group.
I wonder if they'll be deplatformed by anybody. I doubt it.
Oh, well. Oh, no, they're not going to be deplatformed. They are the power. We've got to be clear about that. At this moment in time, they are still the power. Donald Trump as president has certain levers he can press, as Paul rather, but as I said, ultimately, this group that we're talking about, of which the New York Times, to be very clear, is part, are still the people who are in control. They are the people who are in control. That is why it is people like us, not them, who are under pressure.
Donald Trump, before we end the video, I'll just on this note, Donald Trump has a lot of levers that he could pull. Why he hasn't done it, I don't know. I think that's going to come back and really hurt him in 2020. It beggars belief why Donald Trump has not moved forward to categorize all these social media companies as publishers. That is one simple move that he could do that would level the playing field between us, other alternative networks, the big establishment media companies across the board. It'll level the field if he takes these social media companies and labels them as publishers. And it'll cut the legs from under the New York Times as well. They'll have to compete with reporting real, factual, honest news, which they will lose. They will lose. Why Donald Trump hasn't done it, I have no freaking idea, and it's so frustrating because he is going to get – this is going to come back and bite him in the ass in 2020. I don't know. That's the gut feeling that I have.
Well, you're absolutely right. Now, I would add, Alex, to all that you said, that, of course, if Donald Trump does those things, all he would be doing is upholding the First Amendment of the Constitution, which, to be absolutely clear, is not owned by the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN and MSNBC and all those people. It extends to the media generally, and the media generally includes people like us. We shouldn't be restricted in this way, and we should be very clear that the people who are restricting us are part of this combine, which, as we said, includes elements of the US government. But why he doesn't do it, I don't know. He's talked about doing something. He's never done it. Now, whether it's because he's still not fully in control of the US government, or whether he's, frankly, his attention span doesn't, extend to this sort of thing, or whether really he's more interested in other matters, I simply don't understand. I simply don't know myself. All I will say is, by not sorting out media properly, and all we're asking, let's be very clear about this, we're not asking for censorship or restrictions on anyone. The New York Times can go on publishing all this material, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, they have a right to do it. I mean, we have a right to expose them, and they have a right to do it. But, we should have a right to criticize those sort of things. But we're not calling for censorship. We're not calling for restrictions. What we are calling for is a level playing field, which is what the American Constitution in the United States and Article 10 of the European Convention of Human Rights in Europe both promise. That's all we're asking for. Now, if he doesn't do it, then all he's going to be up against is going to be that same media combine, which has given him hell over the last 3 years and which will give him hell in 2020.
Yeah, he doesn't do it, Alexander. I think my gut feeling says that he doesn't do it out of hubris. I think arrogance is getting to him there, and he thinks I can beat them in 2020, even though all of them will be against me. Yeah. All of them, Google, Facebook, Twitter, I'll still beat them and I'll show everybody. And I think he's making a very, very big bet, a very risky gamble there, because they are going to swing votes. There's no doubt about it.
Absolutely. Can I just say something about that? Because, you see, in my opinion, they did swing votes in 2016. People consistently say that the Russiagate stories that were published during the election didn't work because Donald Trump in the end won. Well, he didn't win the popular vote. Perhaps if there'd been a level playing field, perhaps if people like us, who were already in 2016, we were already saying that Russiagate is nonsense, perhaps if we'd been given an equal voice then, he would have won with a bigger margin. and maybe he would have won the popular vote. I have always said that, in my opinion, the story that Donald Trump was being helped by the Russians almost certainly did him much more harm than the actual Podesta and DNC emails, which were leaked by WikiLeaks. I think that is, for me, almost a certainty. And I think if Donald Trump makes the mistake of thinking that because he won by the skin of his teeth in 2016, despite taking on this vast media combine, he can do it all over again in 2020, relying just on his Twitter feeds. Well, I think his gamble is not just a risky one. I think it's a reckless one. And I think he's being reckless with his own presidency.
All right, Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran. Thank you very much, guys. If you like this video, click on the subscribe button down below and click on the notifications bell to make sure you get notifications every time we push out a new video. You can get an audio copy of this video. Follow us on iTunes and SoundCloud. And don't forget, you can donate to us on PayPal, Patreon, and now Subscribestar. The links are in the description box down below. And don't forget, go to the Duran shop and pick up ebooks, polo shirts, all kinds of merchandise, and of course you can get our magic mugs as well. Alexander, you have a magic mug with you tonight?
I'm afraid not, and I'll tell you why.
I've got.
You have. My brother and his wife, and his girlfriend, I should say, are here, so they're all drinking from them at the moment. So there you go. Because they are great and fantastic mugs. And look what a magnificent mug Alex is holding at this moment in time, with the double-headed eagle of the Russian Federation. That's not the same as the imperial eagle, by the way, of the Russian Empire. That is Vladimir Putin's eagle, a double-headed eagle. Just as this that I proudly wear on this magnificent polo shirt that I'm wearing at this moment is the Duran double-headed eagle. It's not the Russian double-headed eagle at all. It's our very own double-headed eagle, which says that we cover East and West, because that's what we do on our geopolitical website. And we do it refreshed by the amazing mugs that Alex is drinking from. Usually I drink tea from mine, but I think Alex drinks coffee. And of course I wear these fantastic polo shirts when I do that, and I work from them. And one of the things that we do is we work on our books. You didn't mention our books, Alex, because you were talking about the deep state and the plot against Donald Trump. And of course, we've written 2 books on precisely that subject. We've written 2 books on Russiagate, one on Brexit, in which we outline all the various plots and conspiracies that we've been talking about, including on this program with relation to Donald Trump, and in which the New York Times, to be very clear, was a part of. And so we got wonderful things in our shop. We've got shirts like this, which I've worn to the most glittering receptions, and also on hardy mountains in the Peak District and elsewhere. We've got hats, we've got stickers, we've got T-shirts, we've got long-sleeved T-shirts, we've got our magnificent magic mugs. Alex will tell you where you can buy them. Go to our shop, buy them, help yourself, and help the Duran.
Yeah, just look at the description box and you'll find a link to the Duran shop, theduranshop.com. Alexander Mercouris, thank you very much. Till next time, everybody. Take care.